On behalf of Shiva and myself, I extend a very warm welcome to this webinar today on an all too critical theme. And managing 21st century talent is nothing new to all of you. I'm acutely aware that many of you who have signed up for the webinar today are very well experienced HR professionals. We have been facing the challenge of attracting and retaining talent for very many years now. As many of you know, roughly a decade ago, McKinsey did a longitudinal study of challenges with the talent and even published a book titled The War for Talent. Of course, McKinsey's the rigor of research, recommendations, together with the insights is very powerful. War for Talent continues to inspire a lot of people like you and me in the HR as not only providing insights, but also a good amount of suggestions around how can we possibly win the war for talent. One thing is very clear, even if we tend to assume that the war for talent is over, I think it is safer to say that the talent won. Organizations are still struggling, notwithstanding many innovative plans and programs. The issue here is not only acquiring great talent, which many of us are fairly successful with, but once we acquire them, how do we manage them, retain them, engage them, inspire them towards pretty good performance? And what is interesting about the 21st century talent is that it kind of comprises multiple generations. There are schools of thought that say that right away, right now, there are 5 different generations that are in the workforce. In many of our companies, there are at least 3 generations, the Gen X, the Gen Y, or the Gen Y, often referred to as the millennial, also the Gen Z. Now, managing all of them at once is a very interesting challenge. And I think it kind of puts our skills to test while simultaneously challenging us to scale our HR programs, policies, and approaches to a much, much higher level, altogether a different orbit. So the way the agenda has been crafted for this webinar is understanding a little bit about the new age talent, and then what do we do to attract, very briefly, what do we do to engage this talent once we have gotten them on board, and finally, how do we retain the hard obtained talent? It's hard enough to get the talent, it's going to be even harder retaining them. And roughly, as we go through this for an hour or so, the good news comes. The good news usually is my way of saying that my presentation will come to an end. Then hopefully we spend 15 minutes addressing your questions. Now, this is a humorous slide. You know, the guru's here, so look enlightened. Well, I don't claim to be any guru on this subject either, but just to lighten a moment. This is a very interesting observation by Dr. Ramcharan. Ramcharan, of course, needs no introduction. Many of us know him well. Ramcharan was also in the recent International HR Conference hosted by National HRD Network a year and a half ago. Ramcharan published a book together with Bill Connerty, the former global head of HR of General Electric, where in the very first page of the book, Talent Masters, he makes this very interesting observation. It's not only interesting, but it's also very provoking. He says if the business managed their money as carelessly as they manage people, most would be bankrupt. Now, I think this is a very powerful statement. It's a very loaded statement, as all of us can appreciate. It only means that most businesses globally are not paying as much attention to people as they do for money. And if they ever paid the similar attention to money as they are now currently doing to people, they would just go bankrupt. And this is not to be taken very lightly. Organizations have to rediscover, re-architect, recraft their programs and policies, because the kind of talent that is coming to work for us today is very, very different than any time in the past. This is a very common slide that many of you may have seen it. The numbers may slightly vary in different presentations and different sources, but the key message here is that the bulk of the workforce that come to work for us today constitute Gen Y and Gen Z. Baby boomers have by and large retired. Gen X will still constitute pretty decent percentage of the workforce till I guess about 2025. The estimated number is about 15%. But by 2030, the baby boomers will dramatically reduce, and substantial increase we will see in the coming of the Gen Y and Gen Z. Interestingly enough, this slide should be very interesting, and I know we all know this fact for sure. But nonetheless, here is a data from US Census Bureau that bulk of the Gen Z today live in India and China. And that makes our job all the more interesting and at the same time challenging, because we as HR professionals have to learn to understand their aspirations, understand their abilities, understand their, and then probably learn to manage them better. That is the context for today's webinar. Some fun facts. The term millennial, which refers to the Gen Y, was coined way back in 1991, and in the book Generations, The History of America's Future by Neil Howe and William Strauss. Ever since then, I think the term millennial has stayed on in the HR parlance. Interestingly, in Sweden, they are referred to as generation sorry for this small couple of seconds of delay. So in Sweden, they are called as generation curling for whatever reasons, and they are also known as generation Sirius in Norway and generation John Paul II in Poland, and Chinese call them as Ken Lao Zu, or the generation that eats the old. Very appropriate, I guess. And of course, Japanese have their own name for this. That means that millennials are always people who do two things at once. The next slide is about adding some very interesting facts about the new gen. Interestingly, the first bullet may not be surprising to many of us. The number of people living outside their home country is larger than ever in the history. And this bulk of these people do come from the new gen workforce that we are really talking about. If the migrants globally were to constitute a country, assuming that virtually they live together, they would be the 5th most populous country in the world. That data must be interesting, because today in India, we aren't just managing people who are brought up here in India, but we are managing a global population. Some of the information technology and other companies in India today have more than 25, 30, or even sometimes 50 nationalities working for them. And soon enough, in a year from now, Gen Z will make up over 36% of the global workforce and perhaps constitute a vast majority of the new gen workforce that we are talking about. And understandably, the new gen workforce is very well connected. 46% of them are connected for 10 hours or more in a day. Shouldn't be surprising to all of us. We can safely say technology is a fifth sense. They would rather give up a sense of smell than losing touch with the technology. Bulk of them telecommute. And as we know, telecommuting is not necessarily working from home, but working from any office of the organization that is close by to them or convenient to them. And over 98% of companies have allowed people to work out of their usual office, from wherever they like to. Another interesting data point is about the attention span. This shouldn't be surprising. Many of us have, our children who qualify as a Gen Z, and their attention span is 8 seconds. So we, as parents, we know why they don't pay attention to us or listen to us. 8 seconds is their attention span. And the last data should be equally disturbing for all of us, that well over half of the Gen Z in India in particular are seriously considering quitting their jobs and changing over. These are certain fun facts or interesting facts just we need to take into account in order to manage our workforce much better. What makes the new gen very different? I won't cover all the bullets. Some of them are self-explanatory. Look at the second bullet, flexibility at work. Now, this new gen workforce is very passionate about flexibility, prefer flexibility, and one of the preconditions for even accepting a job. Rigid work hours, rigid workplaces are not their cup of tea. They may like to work in a garden. They may like to work, on a beach side. Well, at least organizations are making an attempt to create, a very different ambience in the workplace. This is not just the possibility with companies like Google, but even smaller companies without a great brand to be able to attract are now paying enormous attention to creating a flexible workplace, or at least facilitating flexibility at work. And third bullet is equally important. There is a school of thought, sometimes very vociferously expressed, that the younger generation is more after money. But that is not necessarily true, as all of us informed about the millennials and Gen Y and Gen Z already knew. The younger generation is more focused on a purpose and meaning, and they are very unlikely to sign up for a job with an organization that does not support a larger purpose. That's the real good news, and a lot of soul searching necessary for the organizations. Contrary to another popular belief, the younger generation, the new gen workforce, actually expect frequent feedback and coaching conversation with their superiors or their supervisors. Now, we will come back to this coaching element later, but I think that is something to be kept in mind, because there is another popular myth that the new gen workforce does not pay attention to feedback or does not like feedback. They actually invite feedback, ask for feedback, and a lot of them actually use the feedback for continuous learning and improvement. And the last bullet on the slide shouldn't surprise many of us again. Unlike the past generation, the generation to which the baby boomers and Gen X belong, the Gen Y and Gen Z generation prefer to operate within boundaries and do not want to be micromanaged. I may even say that they hate to be micromanaged. Now, incidentally, many of us are familiar with the Project Oxygen that Google became very well known for. It's one of the frequently used analytics case study. I use it frequently in some of my IIM programs as well. Harvard, December 2013 issue carried a elaborate article titled "How Google Sold Its Engineers on Management," which is a summary of this Project Oxygen, where interestingly the second important or second behavior that Google has expected their manager to demonstrate on an ongoing basis is cease to micromanage, not be a micromanager. But having said that, there is an addition to it that the same Googlers said, however, they want their managers to micromanage their career, which means that managers must pay greater attention to managing the career of people they manage, but do not micromanage or stop micromanaging their day-to-day work assignments. Next slide is something to support what we saw earlier, taken straight out of Cisco's Connected World report, that a majority of the new gen workforce do not want to be confined to a workplace. They just believe contribution is much more about what you do than where you go and do it. And obviously, the new gen workforce also brings with it a very interesting characteristic that they actually prefer to work in a very collaborative fashion. Collaboration is a very key word, and we will keep revisiting this during this webinar a couple of times, because organizations are kind of now recognizing the fact that people want to work in a very collaborative environment. So in terms of equipping the new gen workforce, organizations have to really invest in providing a lot of collaboration tools that people can use towards delivering the desired outcome. Now, this is very, very interesting. And this is supported by very many studies. Consulting firms that focus on managing talent have all, have this uniform view about the new gen talent, that these people respect and expect a lot of transparency. They are often referred to as the truth hunters. They do not like a closed communication. They want open and transparent communication. They would like to believe that the employer and the leaders running an organization are honest, reliable, and will hopefully provide the necessary financial security. But they are truth hunters, that they will not buy stories that they know for sure is not trustworthy in the first place. They have clear preferences, as you can see in the next slide. Number one, obviously, is they prioritize culture. Now, in good old days, we took a brand for granted. You join an IBM, you join a Hewlett Packard, you join a Microsoft, you join an Asian Paints, you join a Wipro, Infosys, many other great companies in India and outside. We just took the culture for granted, and luckily we weren't disappointed. But I think the younger generation, the new gen workforce, as we keep referring to them, really want to understand culture in a bit more of a detail. Do they have an empowering culture, or do they have a stifling culture? Do managers delegate or they do not? Does the organization encourage flexi time, or they are very rigid about people having to confine themselves to an office and a chair? Interestingly enough, today with the social media, a lot of data gets collected. In fact, a study by Glassdoor published in a HBR article supports this big time, that the new gen workforce study the culture through the backdoor ratings, the Glassdoor ratings, and backdoor referencing through the ex-employees and sometimes even the current employees, and try and understand what kind of a culture does the organization have. If the culture is not something that they will relish and enjoy, no matter how much money the company is willing to offer, no matter how close the office is in terms of commuting, they are not going to take the offer. They will just say politely no. Culture, obviously, I know many years ago, many years ago, Peter Drucker said culture eats strategy for breakfast. Nothing holds more truth than that now. New gen workforce is very fuzzy about, very keen about the culture that they are signing up for. They also value employee experience quite a lot. You know, there is a saying in English that bees do not just work in the honeybee, thing, but they actually live there. The experience of employees is significantly revealed that what counts more than anything is the kind of employee experience organizations are able to create for the people. And understandably, today, design thinking is helping organizations big time in terms of creating a candidate experience, an employee experience, right through the life cycle of all the employees. Very recently, as all of us know, the Global Workforce Forum also conducted the first ever HR hackathon in Bangalore, where several teams from reputed companies participated and addressed several significant issues that are before the HR professionals. So I think design thinking is one way, but there are many approaches by which organizations can create a very valuable and memorable employee experience. I think that counts a lot for the new gen workforce as well. We looked at the open and transparent communication a little bit ago. I think new gen values this more than anything else. And interestingly enough, studies by Professor Gareth Jones of London School of Business and quite a few other researchers have also shown that the new gen workforce do not respect hierarchy as much as the earlier generations did. By the way, this is not to be misunderstood as they have disrespect for hierarchy. Far from it. What we mean by little respect is that leaders cannot throw their weight around. Leaders cannot command and control. Leaders cannot simply expect obedience simply because they have a bigger title. The new gen workforce appreciates and respects knowledge and contribution rather than titles in a hierarchy. They know their worth very well. They are not very worried about, contrary to popular belief. There are studies that I have seen, and many of you may have also seen, that the new gen workforce is very concerned with the job security. But I have a contrary point of view that I think particularly bulk of the new gen workforce understand their worth very well, which means they aren't as worried about job security or the jobs going away, because they're quite capable of very swiftly reskilling, cross-skilling, and upskilling themselves. They are very organization savvy in the sense that they know who the decision makers are, they know who matter in the organization, they know who are influential, who hold the budget. By the way, with all pretty good intention to get things going. Very savvy with organizational politics and can navigate through reasonably well. And yet another interesting feature which we all know for sure is they have a very low boredom threshold. They really are looking for very challenging and interesting assignments. This is challenging and interesting assignments are not necessarily restricted to people in the high technology domain, but even in the good old organizations where manufacturing is big time. I think people today, the younger generation that is walking into the workforce today, have a low boredom threshold. They really want a really challenging, meaningful, where they get a sense that they are really contributing, and through contribution, they are also learning on a continuous basis. They want to be connected to other clever people, which simply translated, these smart, intelligent, younger workforce would like to work with other smart, intelligent colleagues. They cannot tolerate idiots. To be, I can be only as simple as that. The last but one bullet is very interesting. They won't thank you. This does not again mean that they lack gratitude. It only means that the younger generation, the new generation workforce, believe that whatever recognition they receive from the organization, increments, promotions, plum postings, they believe, and they believe for a good reason, that they deserve it, they've earned it. It is no favor done by an organization or by the supervisor. Gone are the days when the older generation used to thank their managers every time they got a raise, every time they got a plum posting, or every time they received a promotion. Now, that is not to be expected. As I said, this does not mean that they lack gratitude, but they genuinely believe they've earned it. They don't have to go around thanking a whole lot of people because it's been given to them. And the last bullet is that they have their choice to give their very best. They whenever they join a company, whenever they give their very best, they realize it's by choice. You cannot mandate them to be innovative. You cannot mandate that they leverage their creativity for organization. We have to create a climate. And I think the whole webinar today about managing the new gen workforce is about creating that context, creating that environment where the younger generation or the new gen workforce feel so very comfortable and voluntarily giving their very best. I think this in a way, and there can be many more. I just put together an illustrative list of preferences that the new gen workforce is demonstrating today. Now, what do we do to attract the new gen workforce? Very briefly, I think here is a cartoon that just captures the imagination of the cartoonist. Sure, you like it, but hiring is much more than this. Another interesting data from the former CEO of Capital One, Richard Fairbank. At most companies, people spend 2% of their time recruiting, and my goodness, a whole lot of time managing the recruiting mistakes. Now, this is just to show how much attention is required at the time of hiring the right talent in. There are estimates by Harvard Business Review and others that the cost of replacement can be 21% or even more of the annual salary. These estimates can vary, but we all know that the cost involved in losing a good talent and losing a lot of time over replacing them. Now, once again, how do we get the right talent in? Opportunities are plenty. Even as in some pockets we talk about problems of unemployment, slowing down employment in some economies and countries, the fact of the matter is that today talented people are able to find more jobs than jobs are able to find talented people. As we saw earlier, culture matters big time. This is not only by a study by Glassdoor, but many other studies have shown that great talented youngsters prefer to join a company where the culture is very supportive, very engaging, very inspiring, very empowering, and not just the opposite. So I think culture cannot be left to the, to a default opportunity. Now, I think the CEO and the entire leadership team, ably assisted by the HR leader, should invest in providing a great culture. Talking about culture, I'm reminded of one of the finest and most operative definition of culture that I came across, while reading. This is by Professor Warren Bennis. Warren Bennis needs no introduction to those of us on the call. Professor of strategy, leadership, and I think he has spent all his time researching leadership, writing about leadership, lecturing leadership. He was a very senior professor with the Marshall School of Business in Southern California University. His definition of culture is very inspiring, and it's also very operational. Now, traditionally, culture can be defined as, and you can give a sociological, anthropological definition of culture, but very operating definition of culture was given by Dr. Warren Bennis when he said culture is how leaders behave and what behaviors leaders tolerate. Very simple, isn't it? Yet very powerful. Culture is how leaders behave and what behaviors leaders tolerate. That is what constitutes an organization's culture. Now, that actually matters for the younger generation. The culture is not very supportive, not very appealing. Forget about your ability to hire good talent. Secondly, I think in order to attract the new gen talent, organizations have to think and craft an employee value proposition, which is very different than the approach that organizations pursued in the past. For example, traditionally the EVP used to be what the organization thought that they would offer to the top talent in order to attract them. That is what you call as the demand side of the talent segmentation. Now, those of us who are familiar with people analytics or the HR analytics, segmentation is a very critical piece of any analytics, marketing analytics, segments customers in terms of priority customers or non-priority customers and stuff like that. The finance folks use analytics in terms of where to invest, where not to invest. That is a given thing. In HR, we seldom segment except in terms of grades and compensation bands and things like that. But I think in order to be able to attract the new gen workforce, organizations have to think beyond the demand side, which is the organization side of the EVP, and start focusing on the supply side of the segmentation, which is the talent side. Now, if you know what kind of talent you really are trying to hire, if you realize that the kind of talent you want is very different from the kind of talent that we hired in the past, supply side of segmentation has to be paid attention, which means what is it that the new gen workforce will accept in return for their contribution, in return for their creativity and stuff like that. So I think studies have to happen in terms of the supply side of segmentation. Employee value propositions have to be crafted in order to reflect what the new gen workforce is looking to receive, rather than what you and I on the employer side of the demand side are willing to offer. And I mean, there's more literature available on the subject, but I stop here in terms of that very critical aspect of EVP. The third important thing is about interview process. Companies like Google, once upon a time, used to do about 11 interviews on an average to hire somebody in. That to them, they dictated the rigor. But today, I think even Google has recognized and realized that the same impact can be accomplished with 3 or 4 interviews, because the younger generation is not willing to wait for too long, and of course is obviously able to showcase their talent in even brief meetings. So I think condensing the interview process is very critical. No longer can organizations and talent acquisition managers prolong the interview process, bring in the candidate as many times as you want them to come. That's not on anymore. Now, obviously, while condensing the interview process, I think what is also very important is to create a very memorable, exceptional candidate experience. Candidate experience is unfortunately not paid a whole lot of attention by many companies. We talk about employee experience once they've come on board, but I think candidate experience is a very critical aspect of the employer branding process as well. Now, how do we create an exceptional candidate experience? And design thinking can probably help us here as well. Now, there are organizations that have succeeded big time. For example, Zappos. Zappos, of course, needs no introduction. Zappos is a company that was started way back by Tony Hsieh. He started, as we all know, the online selling of footwear. Then later on, as they grew in business, I think Amazon acquired Zappos. Zappos has very, very interesting process right through the recruitment all the way to till they leave the company. Now, obviously, Zappos is even a very interesting philosophy that those who come on board but discover in a month's time, a month and a half's time that they don't belong to Zappos. Zappos even gives them a bonus to leave the company. Now, imagine the kind of investment they are making in creating a candidate experience and also filtering in the right kind of candidates to come in. And the next bullet is something that we spoke about. Organizations that cannot sell on a larger purpose, a vision, more than just the paycheck, will not be able to attract the very best of the new gen workforce. New gen is absolutely committed to a larger purpose. It is just not about a publicity blitz. It's much more. A lot of sincere, serious, soul searching has to happen on the part of business leaders and HR alike to be able to present a holistic story of what is the larger purpose for which the organization is standing. Say, Aravind Hospital believes in eliminating needless blindness. Google talks about democratizing information. Zappos talks about creating most memorable customer experience. I think a lot of these things resonate well with the younger generation, by the way. Moving quickly on, the last bullet is very, very critical as well. Interestingly enough, the new gen workforce is not only preferring diversity, they demand diversity. They really want to work in a diverse environment. This also supports a point of view that the new gen workforce is looking to join organizations that will give them not just a local or national exposure, but they will prefer to join companies that will give them an opportunity to work globally. They prefer diversity to a company that does not have diversity as a priority. So I think attracting new gen workforce requires attention to culture, understanding the talent side of the segmentation and what is it that they expect from the company, shortened interview process, and connect with a larger purpose. And obviously, pretty good attention to promoting a diversity, a kind of an environment in the organization. That is, I think, a very short note on attracting. And there are, of course, more than the bullets that are covered in the slide, but these are taken from several research work that has happened in the area of attracting the millennial and the Gen Z. Obviously, coming to learning, I think most of us recognize it. And I think our learning management systems and our L&D organizations are beginning to pay attention towards this. But in my humble opinion, a lot of organizations are still trending towards traditional approach to facilitating learning and development. The new gen workforce obviously prefers instant learning. They want to, they prefer learning through their mobile phones and what have you, anytime, anywhere kind of a learning. They just do not want to be confined to a classroom, which is traditional way to impart knowledge and skill. They are very savvy with social media. Micro learning is again a critical aspect of facilitating learning for the millennials and new gen. Short videos are very, very powerful. In fact, a lot of organizations have started to do this big time. Now, look at the way the Khan's Academy became very popular. Now, I think that's a good example. The Khan's Academy by Salman Khan in US, I think happened many years ago. And even today, I think a lot of youngsters flock to those videos other than sitting in a traditional with a tuition master and taking the tuition. They just click every conceivable subject that is in the Cons Academy. And then I think a Cons Academy kind of learning opportunities will go very well with the millennials. And obviously, the learning has to be gamified big time. Organizations are doing it. A lot of simulations, computer and board simulations are picking up big time. There are several organizations that are actually creating the learning programs and learning events by gamification, etc. And not to take away mentoring and coaching, I think this will forever continue to be a most popular subject. The millennials, the Gen Z, together constitute the new gen workforce, actually want to learn from mentoring and coaching as well. So I think the role of a manager has to necessarily become a big time coach. Now, once again, the Project Oxygen Google People Analytics study has confirmed a big time. When they eventually came with the 8 leader behaviors, the number one behavior was we want our manager to be a good coach. And that I think resonates well with this why millennials prefer to learn through mentoring and coaching. A little combination of personalized learning, collaborative learning where they learn through interaction, not just sitting all alone, and active learning, which simply means that it is not just conceptual learning, which is of course very important, but conceptual learning combined with actually action learning. They actually get down to putting to practice whatever they have learned. All of this I think is going to make learning a fun for the millennials. Organizations have to pay a lot of attention to it. Pearson, of course, is a very well-known organization in the publication domain. Their insight, I think, is very revealing. So if you really look at the slide out there, I think Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat, Facebook are all becoming extremely popular medium for learning insofar as the new gen learning is concerned. And understandably, here is a breakup of the millennials, which is a Gen Y, and the Gen Z, that about 71%, it doesn't vary much, 70 and 71% between millennials and Gen Z, are also very heavily tuned towards self-learning, that they are quite capable of taking interest, looking into sources, looking for people who they can go and learn from, very, very gung-ho on self-learning. And I think organizations have to facilitate a process or a offer time, so that the individuals, the new gen workforce can actually go and seek after the learning that they are looking for. And I think given the fact that they are very connected all the time, their ability to locate the right source and the right content, I think, becomes relatively easy for them. The last piece of my webinar is, now that we have focused a bit on what do we do to attract and what do we do to facilitate learning, the last piece is about engaging the new gen. As the cartoon picture here shows vividly, it's not that easy to engage the new gen because they are an easily bored generation, that nothing interests them for too long. Now, in good old days, you could just assign the routine task for a fairly long time and people felt very comfortable doing it. But then today, younger generation is very different. The boredom threshold is very low, as we have seen just a while ago. Now, this picture shows that, you can offer them very many different ways of engaging them, but eventually they really want to get on with doing something different, something more, something fresh, something unique, something very engaging. Now, the next one is also a cartoon. This is simply to show that many organizations' predicament today, that employees have a huge challenge being engaged, and organizations and HR leaders equally have a major challenge engaging people. What do we do then? Some ideas. Here is pioneering work done by two thought leaders. Zenger and Folkman, again, need probably no introduction. Their books on extraordinary leadership, inspiring leadership, The Extraordinary Coach are all best-selling books. Zenger and Folkman videos are very inspiring. Now, their work has thrown significant light in terms of what kind of leader behaviors can potentially engage the new gen workforce. Here is a list of them. I again wouldn't like to go through all of them. Some of them are very self-explanatory. Drive for results is one of them. That the way to engage new gen workforce is demonstrating the managers have to, genuinely offer the end goal, the purpose towards which the efforts are going, so that people can relate to the big picture. I think that's extremely critical. Walk the talk. Leaders cannot say one thing and do another. They have to role model the behavior they want from their direct reports and juniors, and that's how to engage people and promote a lot of trust between the team members. Gone are the times when unhealthy competition used to be encouraged. No longer. People prefer to build a lot of trust and work in collaboration. And understandably, the last bullet, leaders who demonstrate courage in managing conflicts. I think this is very, very important. Conflicts are nothing new to us. Since time immemorial, we have had conflicts in the organization. When a bunch of people come together, there's bound to be conflict of ideas, conflict of priorities, conflict for resources, all that kind of opportunities that offer at once an opportunity to share resources and collaborate, or refuse to collaborate and get into a very conflicting situation. But I think leaders who demonstrate ample courage in confronting conflicts and resolving them in a healthy manner have greater potential to engage the new gen workforce. Of course, and I've skipped a couple of bullets because they are very self-explanatory. Here is a list of leader behaviors that will. Moving quickly on, this is my very famous slide. I have been speaking about this in many, many training programs that I deliver for corporates. I invite business leaders to focus on these 6 crucial conversations that will help engage people. Number one, obviously, is performance conversation. And more recently, a lot of organizations like, IBM, Microsoft, Adobe, Deloitte, and several other organizations, including Kelly Systems. In fact, Kelly Systems started revamping performance appraisals way back in 2010-11. Much later, Adobe and Deloitte revamped their performance appraisal system. Now, one of the very overarching feature of a lot of new revised performance appraisal system is frequent check-ins or frequent performance conversations, as opposed to end of 6 months or annual performance conversations. So I think the way to engage the new gen workforce is to practice very frequent, possibly weekly ones, if not once a fortnight, kind of a performance conversation where just 2 things happen. One, check with them how the week was that went by. Second, focus on what priorities should the direct report pay attention to in the week that is coming forward. So what went well in the previous week, and what are some of the priorities, and what is the focus for the next week? This kind of a very quick, short, powerful, frequent performance conversations can engage people extremely well, particularly the new gen workforce. Although this is not just confined to the new gen, this holds good for all the generations. Development conversation. Very interestingly, in my interaction with several roundtables of employees at all levels, one of the things that stood out was a complaint that the managers have never spoken with them a couple of minutes on whether they are learning, they're developing, they have a sense of growth and things like that. So I think managers have to spend quality time, even if it is about 5, 7, 10 minutes, on development conversation. Calling during the one-on-ones, calling the employee and then checking with him or with her, hey, are you learning? Do you see enough growth opportunities? And by the way, by growth opportunities, we don't necessarily mean promotions. It's about learning something new. It's about adding value to oneself. It is also incidentally about how are they adding value to their work and their team and their organization. I think development conversations are extremely critical, and we often hear a complaint it is not happening enough. Third, obviously, is a recognition conversation. Peter Block calls it as a gift conversation. I think recognition conversations are about appreciation. People crave for appreciation, particularly the younger generation is craving for appreciation from peer group. They value peer group recognition more than the boss recognition, but bosses can do their bit as well. So recognition conversation where you call people and say, you know what, I can't tell you how much I enjoy your being part of my team. I really want to thank you for your contribution last month. We have an exciting month ahead. Let's work together to make things happen. Kind of recognition conversation, very brief, yet extremely powerful as a mechanism to engage people. Gratitude conversations are very critical. In my performance appraisal workshops that I do for a lot of corporates, I often ask the managers, how do you start your performance conversation? How do you start your performance appraisal discussion? A lot of them say, we start discussing the KPAs, KRIs, goals, objectives, and what have you. And I'm very surprised that most of them do not start the performance appraisal conversation with few words of gratitude. Imagine if a manager were to commence the conversation expressing gratitude. Hey, the last year has been fantastic. I think we did well together as a team, and you played a very, very important role in making things happen. This performance appraisal conversation is an opportunity for me to express my gratitude. We will come to the nuts and bolts of the conversation later. We will talk about some of the strength that you displayed, some of the areas for development, etc. in a short while. But fundamentally, I really want to thank you for your superb contribution. Imagine how beautifully the performance conversations can go, performance appraisal conversations can end if conversation begins with expression of gratitude. I think gratitude conversations are also not happening big time. According to several researchers, there's also been a Harvard article recently on why gratitude matters and how it can influence the engagement of people. And next one is the career conversation. Once again, let us not misunderstand this is conversation around promotion. This is a conversation about what kind of job opportunity will engage people, motivate people, inspire, get the very best out of them. Ever since Deloitte came with their career lattice model, I think a lot of organizations have embraced the career lattice model. Many more organizations are contemplating to do or not to do. But I think it's very important to understand from employees during career conversation, the managers have to listen to them on their aspirations, their abilities, and the kind of a time frame by which they want to dial up, dial sidewards, or dial down in their career. I think career lattice offers an ample opportunity. It's not about promoting people. It's about discussing if they are ready. And I think if I may say it in one sentence, career conversations are about encouraging our employees to be up to date, to acquire skills that are contemporary and relevant. In a short sentence, career conversations are also about helping employees to remain career resilient. And finally, the engagement conversations. There are many distractions at work and outside. Our employees can easily lose sight of the focus. So I think managers have to, from time to time, conduct conversations very briefly for 5-7 minutes just to get a sense of how engaged the employees are. I am of the view that while organizations invest big money, tons of money, on getting consultants to come and study their engagement quotient and stuff like that, engagement index through employee engagement surveys and what have you, I'm of the view that if a manager is smart enough, through a couple of minutes of engagement conversation once a week or once a fortnight, they can get to understand the pulse of their direct reports much better than any engagement survey by any consulting firm can ever reveal. So I think, in my opinion, these 6 crucial conversations, if I may call them as crucial conversations, can actually go a long way in terms of engaging the new gen workforce. Now, I'm just skipping the couple of slides. Now, basically to drive home a point of view that a lot of onus lies in the hands of the managers. Interestingly enough, many of us may have read the book The Future of Management by Gary Hamel. Gary Hamel is a professor, as we all know, at the London School of Business. Gary Hamel is a very powerful speaker, and some of his videos are very inspiring and that are available on YouTube. Would encourage you to look at some of those Gary Hamel's videos. I think Gary Hamel writes beautifully in the book Future of Management. That's very interesting observation. That unfortunately, the 20th century managers that we have in our organizations today are leveraging the 18th and 19th century management paradigms and techniques to manage 21st century workforce. Look at that beautiful, controversial, yet very important comment by Dr. Gary Hamel. Managers belong to a generation, leverage management paradigms and techniques of 18th century and 19th century to manage the 21st century workforce, and understandably they have serious problem in managing. What is the way out? Now here is straight out of Gary Hamel's book, The Future of Management. Competitive advantage in the digital age. By the way, we are talking about digital age. All organizations are now going digital. So this is not about information technology companies. This is not about high-tech companies. Every other company today is going digital big time. We're talking about Industry 4.2 on digitization everywhere. I think competitive advantage in the digital age lies not in securing the best technology, which companies will anyway do it, but in using and managing their talent very well. Now that demands truly great leadership at all levels. When we refer to leadership, we refer to the first line leader all the way up to all upline leaders, just not the senior management alone. Truly great leadership is required to manage the new gen workforce. This leadership in a radically transparent world where organizations are far more complex, where ideas are a commodity, and where talent is very mobile and autonomous. Both autonomous and mobile are very key words here. Leaders must create a culture, and we have been talking since beginning the importance of culture for hiring, for training, for engaging everywhere. Leaders must create a culture where motivation thrives, ideas spark into life, and people, whoever and wherever they are, bound together in a common cause, which is the purpose that we really talked about. And this requires significant change in the mindset of the managers who manage the new gen workforce. Taking another leaf from the same book, Future of Management by Gary Hamel, this is a very interesting quote, and I love quoting this in every program that I run. Asking a manager to manage less is a bit like asking a carpenter to pound fewer nails. They won't do it, right? So yet the oversight, the rigid plans, the comprehensive assessment, strict policies, and mandatory procedures, in short, the whole father knows the best premise of management is antithetical to building companies that are filled with energetic, slightly rebellious votaries. In a nutshell, the new gen workforce is very high energy and rebellious, and traditional way of managing them just won't work. Here are some ideas, and with this I will kind of approaching to a conclusion of this webinar and open the webinar for a few questions. I think this list is again illustrative. What are we asking for from the managers of the new gen workforce? I think the first one is stop managing people, but instead of manage the climate, create a warm climate, create an empowering climate. You don't have to manage people, they will manage themselves. Focus on strength. I think this is very critical. Studies way back in 1937, when Drucker wrote the book, The Effective Executive, he dedicated a whole chapter on making strengths productive. I think organizations will do well today to leverage the strength of the new gen workforce rather than focusing on the little bit of a weakness that they may have here and there. There's nothing much you can do with what people can't do, but you can do a lot in an organization with what strength people bring to table. Behave like a coach. I think managers have to positively remember that as much as one side of being a manager as a coin is managing them, the other side of the coin is to behave like a coach and mentor the younger generation. lead through expertise, not lead through titles. And that supports the next bullet, influence more than authority, give space and resources, because the younger generation is very, very independent and very autonomous. What they need is a space and resources and amplify accomplishments. This is something, nothing confined to the new gen workforce alone. It applied equally to the baby boomers and Gen X. But here we talk about amplifying accomplishment. People need to know where they are doing very well and get an appropriate pat on the back so that they continue to offer the best of their energy. And I think the next bullet is very, very critical. Protect the new gen workforce from organizational detritus. What do we mean by detritus? What we actually mean here is organizations are known for petty politics. Organizations are known for a lot of bureaucracy. Organizations often have a reason why something cannot be done. Rather than facilitating how things can be done, I think the new gen workforce requires protection by the managers from a lot of these bureaucracy, etc., because they really want an unencumbered environment too. And finally, I think younger gen wants managers who talk straight and who don't beat around the bush. So look at some of these interesting expectations from managers. By the way, none of these expectations should come as a surprise. These are the expectations that great managers through generations have offered to their teams. But I think the emphasis is more today than in the past. So I kind of take next couple of minutes to summarize the managing 21st century workforce. Are we ready? Some of the key messages are: number one, the kind of generation that are coming into workforce today are very different than the kind of generation that came into workforce in the past, which means that we should be willing to completely relook at the way we have been managing people, and manager reorientation and building an absolutely new mindset on the part of the managers is extremely critical. Attracting talent is more about culture than about the paycheck. Learning must be really fun. So gamification is the name of the game. Engaging talent requires those 6 crucial conversations that managers build expertise in. I think once we do this, we are at least solving part of the puzzle. And I won't say the entire puzzle will be solved, the puzzle of managing the 21st century talent. At least part of the puzzles, the large part of the puzzle could be addressed pretty well if some of these key messages are kept in mind. And of course, this is a journey that we need to embark on. We may not become an experts in creating that kind of an environment and culture, but we all can probably make a great beginning. Thank you very much, and looking forward to some of your questions, by the way.
If you have any questions, you can raise your hand. So we'll be able to figure out, and we'll unmute you so that you can ask questions.
Any questions on any of the things that was covered? Appreciate some of your comments. We are able to read it here. Well, if there aren't any comments, we are good to conclude. And then Shiva informs me that the webinar is being recorded and will be put out in the public domain on the YouTube or something. And so you can obviously also share your comments as you go through the full video.
Yes, the webinar has been recorded, and we will be uploading this entire video in the YouTube very soon. We'll share you the link for all the participants. Thank you so much for watching this webinar. So if you have any questions, you can ask us. We have a couple of more minutes to go. You can raise your hand so that we can identify and unmute you. Here is a person by name showing the hand, Ashwath. So Chandrasekhar is a person who is asking question.
Chandrasekhar, please go ahead.
Let me unmute him. Yeah, Chandrasekhar, can you hear us? Can you hear Mali?
Yep, Mali.
Go ahead, please shoot your question, Chandra.
Good afternoon, Mali. Thanks for this nice session. Sorry, I joined a little bit late, but it was very useful. Mali, quick, little more light on these two things. One, you were talking about 6 crucial conversations. In that, if you could throw a little more light on the difference between a career conversation and an engagement conversation.
Thank you very much I will do that. Thank you very much for asking that question. Career conversation is very heavily focused on, the aspirations relating to the career, the growth, opportunities available in the organization, possible next assignments and things of that sort. Whereas engagement conversation is much larger in terms of its depth and the scope. One piece of the engagement jigsaw puzzle is career, but there's much more to the jigsaw puzzle called engagement. So all the 6 conversations put together, the development conversation, the performance conversation, the recognition conversation, the contribution conversation, all of these conversations put together, finally the engagement conversation will kind of enable a leader to fully engage people. So for example, in the engagement conversation, one can even focus on things like what kind of a culture are you experiencing? What kind of a climate are you experiencing? How do you view my leadership style as your manager? All of that can be a significant element of the engagement conversation. Whereas when you do a career conversation, you are very heavily focused on the employee. You may not necessarily talk about your leadership style. You may not necessarily talk about the larger organization culture, but opportunities around growth, opportunities around next assignments and things of that sort. So this is slightly, in terms of scope, career conversation is relatively narrower in scope as compared to the engagement conversation, which is broader in scope, Chandra.
Thank you, Mali. Very insightful. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We have Ramanujam. I'll just unmute Ramanujam.
Ram, please shoot your question, Ram. Ram, you're there? We'll wait for Ram.
Yeah, we'll wait for more Ram, and now I'll just unmute Monica. Monica, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. How are you? Thank you so much for such an amazing insight. Really glad that you picked up the pointers which are apt and essential to understand. The only thing which I'm looking out for, so we understand this latest, when we say Gen Z, we understand what is their way. We are trying to work around with them, and we're trying to figure out what all changes we can implement in our organizations for the same. Now it's happening on the ground levels because this is a baseline we are bringing onto the organizations, and we are trying to gel them with our existing Gen Ys or other generations or our baby boomers altogether.
Right.
How do you think, because essentially the people sitting at a leadership level, they also have to get evolved with this newer way of working, because until and unless they don't make the changes in the way of implementation, it will not get executed. So what are the key milestones you think that at the leadership level, which are the key milestones that they have to first take a step on for making this huge change impactful in the organization?
Thank you, Monica. I think very important question and very, very interesting question as well. I will try to be as brief and still be useful in terms of my answer.
Thank you.
You are bang on. Leaders make a difference. If you
Yeah.
really remember an observation I made during the webinar, that culture is how leaders behave and what behaviors leaders reward and respect or
Mm-hmm.
reinforce. So, which means that everything begins with the leadership team. And in my opinion, I think while entire leadership team, the CEO and the CXOs do play a major role, I think the HR leader has to really take the initiative to really sensitize the leadership team in terms of how the workforce expectations are changing, what kind of workforce profile is coming into the organization. I think it all begins with number one step is sensitizing the senior leadership team that the old ways of managing, people are no longer relevant, or why it can sometimes even be counterproductive. But I think a half a day long workshop by the HR leader on sensitizing the senior leadership team on the nuances and intricacies of the 21st century talent that are coming in terms of what expectations they come with, what kind of organizations they want to work for. And I think we need to do it carefully with a lot of data, rather than senior management team trying to dismiss a HR point of view as it's your view, and I don't think we necessarily agree with you. To overcome that kind of a challenge, I think it's very important to do enough, and most of us do it, by the way, very well. Demonstrate through data, through supportive evidence, that why organizations with certain culture and certain ways of managing people succeed in attracting and retaining people, as opposed to organizations that still continue to pursue traditional paradigms and traditional approaches. So it begins with sensitizing the senior leadership team and getting a significant buy-in. This is, I think, once we do that, and this is not going to be easy, by the way. We still have, as Gary Hamel pointed out, managers who belong to a different generation and perhaps also carry a different management paradigm. Say, for example, we know that communication and connect is a way forward, but still we have managers in our organizations that believe in command and control. It's going to be very difficult to change their mindset, but I think we need to give it a shot. I think it begins with the second important thing. Once we have the buy-in of the senior leadership team, that we need a different mindset to manage the Gen Y and the Gen Z, the next step probably is towards examining all of our HR systems and processes as to how crafted they are towards managing these people. Say, for example, performance management system, just as an example. The good old way of managing performance is that set the goals, and track those goals every 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. I think we're moving away from it. The new performance appraisal management systems are based on an agile mindset, a growth mindset. So I think revamping the performance appraisal system, redesigning and re-equipping all of our leaders in terms of an agile approach to managing performance, which means revisiting goals and objectives at regular intervals, sometimes as frequently as a fortnight or a month, for their relevance. Secondly, ensuring that very frequent performance conversations, no matter how short duration they are, I think those things have to change big time. So, cut the story short, it all begins with HR taking the leadership, building the courage and conviction to sensitize the senior leadership team, and simultaneously recommending systemic changes, whether it is a recruitment system or training and development system or performance management system or even recognition and reward systems. Recognition systems will have to change similarly. For example, the new gen workforce prefer to gather a lot of peer feedback, peer recognition more than the senior leadership recognition. So all our reward systems and recognition systems tweaked in such a way, redesigned in such a way that they take into cognizance, make provision for peer recognition. I'm just giving you a couple of examples. We can talk offline for many more, but I think the message here is sensitize senior management, redesign HR systems that reflect the expectations of the new gen.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Monica.
Thank you, Monica. So I'll just now connect Sundari. Sundari wanted to ask a question. Hi, Sundari, are you there?
Sundari, you are there?
Sundari wanted to ask a question.
You check if Ram is back. Ram, you're still there?
Ramanujam, are you there? Ram? Sundari, can you hear us?
Do you hear me?
Sundari, you are there?
Sundari, can you hear us?
Hello?
Yeah. Sundari, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you as well. Please ask your question, Sundari.
Yeah, I just wanted to, first of all, before I move on to the question, the speech was really wonderful. It's all much needed topic for the current organization as well as to the managers, how to handle the new gen in our company and in the team. Okay, I just want to understand how the industry and the companies are equipped with to welcome and start working with this new generation, or they are all yet to start, or do you see any a view on this? Company.
Well, thank you for this very interesting question, Sundari. So I think my feeling, and then I've been interacting with HR colleagues like you. I think a lot of organizations are appreciating and recognizing that the way to exist and grow is to understand the new generation workforce which is coming in, and then tweaking all policies and programs and management paradigms that absolutely fit in well with the expectations of the new gen workforce. So offline I can talk about data, but I think in my humble opinion, a lot of organizations are making very sincere efforts. Now, on a 1 to 10 scale, 70% of the organizations may be scoring a 2.5, 3 on a 1 to 10 scale, where 1 is still traditional, 10 is new gen ready. Now, maybe 3.5, 4, but I think a good 30% of organizations are way ahead of the curve. They're already a good 7, 7.5, 8 on a 1 to 10 scale. They are very, very ready to embrace. And I think to me, this is a survival thing. This is not a choice that you can manage with your Gen Y, Gen Z readiness or without. This is hardly a choice. If you really want to survive and succeed, the way forward is to sensitize the leadership team on the ways and means of managing the new gen and then moving towards it. As I said, a good 70% may be on a 1 to 10 scales, 3, 3.5, and a good 30% of the organizations may be already on a 7 or 8. I think in the next 3, 4 years, as we get into 2020, 2021, I think a vast majority of the organizations, in my humble opinion, would have transitioned successfully into designing a culture, designing systems and processes, designing leadership paradigms into effectively managing the new gen workforce. I think a lot of us are making efforts. I think it's a very slow process. we all know what it takes to change. And interestingly, management paradigms are the ones that take the longest time to change, because management mindsets are often frozen. But I think we are still unfreezing them and infusing new thoughts and refreezing them. So in my opinion, I guess in about 2 years time, 2.5 years time, majority of the organizations that survive and succeed will have made a significant shift in terms of their readiness to manage the new gen. I think some companies have made baby steps. Some companies are way ahead. Some companies are exemplary. But I think we will get there very shortly. I have no doubt in my mind.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Sundari.
Thank you.
Ram, are you there?
Hey, Ram, are you there? Ram, looks like he has signed up.
Ashwath has raised a question. Hi, Ashwath.
Yeah, hello, sir. Good afternoon. Thank you for your very good insights to us.
Thank you, Ashwath.
Yeah, regarding this recognition conversation, I have only one doubt.
Sure.
Yeah, you said more the peer group recognition is more than the management or leaders recognition. Is
Very
that
true. The Gen Y, Gen Z, and yeah.
Do you feel that is very, very important? And what are the aspects which may affect this?
So when it comes to recognition, in my humble view, nothing affects it adversely. Now, I think the management systems are for a very long time crafted and designed in such a way that when we spoke about recognition, it invariably meant recognition coming from manager's manager, senior management. I'm of the view I think that will continue to be important. Visibility to senior leadership team, visibility to the senior management has proven to be a very powerful motivator and a powerful engagement factor. So I don't think we can dismiss the leadership recognition or senior manager recognition as anything less important, but noticeably, without sitting on judgment right, wrong, I would just say that the new generation workforce is craving for and will appreciate peer recognition much more than they value the recognition from superiors. Now, this does not take away, or we are not saying that let superiors stop appreciating. Far from it. I think as leaders and managers, we have a job to do. This is much more than a ceremonial job. This has an engagement impact. But what the new generation studies have revealed is that they value the peer recognition even more than they value the recognition from superiors. There is no negative sentiment attached to it. I think it's very supplementary and very complementary in my view.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Ashwath.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I think that's about it. And if there are any questions, reach out to us or to Mali directly. We will have this video shared very soon in YouTube. Thank you so much for joining with us for today. Thanks, Molly. It's really a great honor and pleasure having with GWFM Webinar series.
Thank you.
It's really great learning, and I'm sure that the participants have really have the great learning, and especially in this topic, like managing the 21st century talent has been a phenomenal topic and right topic for the right time.
Thank you, Shiva, and thank you all the participants. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much
for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.